Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is the Insight segment. I'm Harold Fisher. Tonight, we salute women making a difference. My guest often tells the stories of others, but she has a rich story and legacy of her own. Denise Rolark Barnes is the publisher and the second generation owner of the Washington Informer newspaper. They have a big gala coming up next week. We're going to talk about that as well. But first, we want to shine the spotlight on our Wednesday Women's History Maker. Denise, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about us and talk with us, I should say, and to kind of celebrate 60 years of the Washington Informer.
Well, Harold, it's a real pleasure to be on with you. My career may have started a little bit earlier, but I followed you over the years, and when I talk about the 60 years celebration of the Washington Informer, I think overall about the Black press and Black journalists and individuals like yourself who have just been the storytellers. Amplifying the positive things that are happening throughout our communities. And so, this is a moment that I feel like I need to celebrate you as well. So thank you.
Well, we'll talk about me at another time. But how does it feel? Does it feel like 60 years? Obviously, when the newspaper started, you were a teeny weeny little person.
kind of, yeah.
So, but how does it feel?
Well, quite honestly, our anniversary, our 60th anniversary was October 16th, 2024. Last year would have been our 60th, or was our 60th. And I started thinking about how we would observe, this moment 2 years earlier. And it's really challenging for me because 60 it seems like a long time, but then it doesn't. And I look at some of my colleagues, like the Afro newspaper, which is now 133 years, I think, and the Pittsburgh Courier and Amsterdam News, and some of these publications that have been around well over 100 years. And so we're like the new kid on the block at 60. I mean, there's some that are younger than us, but when you think about Black newspapers across this country, a lot of us came out of the civil rights movement. So we are all sort of in that 60 to 65 year old age range, and it's a common age. So it's special. And I think the most important thing for me is appreciating the fact that we had been able to survive something that my father thought we would never be able to do, to survive this long. He died in 1994, which is a little over 30 years ago. And even during his lifetime of publishing The Informer and then going on and starting United Black Fund, he used to call this a weekly newspaper, WEAKLY, because he struggled with it. He knew I was going to struggle with it. And he left it to me. He left the struggle to me. So in that respect, I feel it's significant, but I still feel like we're young. We're a young publication.
Mm-hmm. Talk to me about the influence that your father, whom I knew well, and your mother, Wilhelmina Rolark, who was also a DC council member, back in the day, really sitting at the seat of power, but as parents, how were they? How did they instill in you the vigor to do what you're doing with the newspaper today?
Well, some people know and some don't that Wilhelmina was my stepmother. And she and my father married when I was around 7 years old. And my mother, who I'm blessed to still have in my life, who will turn 92
Wow.
in June, and is alive and vibrant, and the person I call the Facebook queen because she's always on Facebook.
Aren't they always?
But all three of them, I'll say, were real activists in their own way. My mother and father and stepmother were all members of the U Street Professional Association, and back in the early '60s, that's where all the Black professionals worked. That was downtown for us. And so, my father was the editor of the Observer newspaper before he started the Informer. My stepmother was a lawyer, Howard grad, and my mother was the secretary of that organization. And so they were all very active. And after my mother and father divorced, my father met my stepmother at a funeral director's picnic. And great place to meet people.
How about that?
And they struck a relationship, and he was very, very careful about who he brought into my life. And from the very beginning, she was just a great person. But I used to really enjoy going with each one of them together, not the couples together, but my mother going to her community meetings, my father and stepmother going to their meetings, and I would just be the kid sitting in the corner listening and doing whatever I could do to occupy my time. And so I got exposed to a lot of the social, the civil, all of the work that was going on in the community. And I listened to grown folk talk about what needed to happen in the city and how it needed to change. And as a matter of fact, when Dr. King was assassinated, I was in junior high school, and my father picked me up one day and took me down to where what he called where the rebellion happened on U Street, 14th and U. First time I'd ever experienced tear gas, probably the last time I've experienced tear gas. But he walked me through those streets with him. And that's where I met Marion Barry and others. They were all activists at the time. So I got exposed to just, the whole work or the effort to claim the city, and, the things that people were doing to get us to, we never got to statehood, but, home rule. That was a fight. And it was just interesting to observe and to meet all the people that I met, some who are no longer with us and some who still are, and who we often, reach out to for stories that we want to tell today, because so many people don't know about the history of this city.
In your life, you went to law school. Did you ever see yourself, even at that early part of your life, becoming the publisher, taking over the newspaper? Did you have other plans for yourself?
I had a bunch of other plans. This was the last thing I was going to do. This is my only summer job. I tell folks I'm probably one of the few Washingtonians that never got a summer job through Marion Barry. I never worked for him. Every time I told my daddy I wanted to sign up, he said, "No, you got a job." And so every summer, I spent at the Washington Informer, and I had a job. I had jobs to do, going to the bank and making bank deposits and, typing up subscriptions and a whole bunch of stuff busy work that kept me busy. And so when I decided to go on to college, my desire was to major in political science. I really wanted to follow in the footsteps of my stepmother. I had gone to national bar conventions and had met, a lot of the children of lawyers who did eventually become lawyers. And that's what I thought I was going to do. So I got into undergrad, major in political science, was awful in political science, but, realized I didn't need to have a political science degree to go to law school. So I applied and I went. And my interest really at that time was to pursue international communications law. And it's funny because there was only one Black-owned firm in the country that practiced that. And this company, two lawyers, two Black men, Hayes and White. And so I worked at the Federal Communications Commission for a summer. And, but I was still putting out the newspaper every day. I mean, law school all day, going to newspaper, put the paper out at night. I was also editor of the Hilltop of the Barrister, which was Howard's law school newspaper. And it's really when I got that position in my second semester, my first year of law school, that I realized, I know how to run this thing. I know how to do this, And there's a story I like to tell that when Justice Thurgood Marshall came to, they were going to name the Moot courtroom after him. And I had asked one of my classmates, who said he was a reporter, to write the story. And at the end of the day, he gave me a transcript.
Wow.
And I was like, Leroy, what am I supposed to do with this? He said, well, Denise, you asked for a reporter. I'm a court reporter. This is what I do for. And it was at that time I said, well, heck, you know what we could do? Let's run the whole speech. Let's just run, because he didn't prepare a speech. He spoke extemporaneously. And we ran it, and the dean of the law school started getting calls from around the country, asking for copies, around the world, actually, asking for copies of Thurgood Marshall's speech. We were the only ones that had it. And he was asking me, how quickly can you get this paper published? And he actually, at the time, was on the board of Kodak. And while I couldn't get anything out of the law school to support the newspaper, at that point, our office was full of Kodak film. He's like this. He was so grateful. So I said, it's funny, when you control the media, you can control the message. And I said, you have a powerful tool right here, Denise. And that's what made me decide to go and work for my dad.
The gala is coming up next week. Talk to me about that event, where people can find out more information, but more importantly, what is the significance? What do you, besides photos and dancing, what do you want people to take away from the gala?
Well, again, we're a newspaper that covers the community. So this gala is not all about us, but it's about legacy. And while I'm a second generation publisher, there are businesses in this community that have existed because of legacy. Ben's Chili Bowl, which is now about to enter into its second generation of ownership. Lee's Florist, which is now in its third generation of ownership. Industrial Bank, third generation. Lofton's Tailors, fourth generation. And what I call a Black serving organization. And I don't know why I keep forgetting the name, but the Music Store, which is not Black owned, but it's in its third generation of serving the community, but especially the Black community. So, and then there's a third generation educator, Stefan Lockridge, whose uncle was Calvin Lockridge, who was president of the school board, and his dad, William Lockridge, who was a school board member and a teacher, and now Stefan, who's 13 years, I believe, in being a teacher. So my dad.
Before you go on, because I've got to take a break.
Okay.
Where can people buy tickets and get information about the when and the where?
The good and the bad news, Harold, is they can't.
Oh, wow.
We're sold out. Yeah, we're sold out. And so
I'll stand outside.
Yeah.
Well, then hold that point, Denise.
Okay.
I'll be back in just a minute. We want to remind people that you can hear this in every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com And the original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next on WHUR. I'm Harold Fisher. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our Wednesday Woman History Maker conversation with Denise Rollard Barnes, the publisher of the Washington Informer. They are celebrating 60 plus years. I guess, Denise, it is 60 and a half years.
Exactly.
Because in October, it'll be 61 years. Before the break, we were talking about how you can attend the gala, which you can't because it's sold out. And like you said, that's the good and bad news.
Yeah, it is. And I wanted to go back. Chuck Levin's was the music store that I was thinking of. Mm-hmm. And, they have been serving Adam Levin, who is the grandson of the owner. They were on 14th Street for years, serving, the local community, and they still do. But because of the rebellion that took place in the 60s, they got burned out. So they moved into Montgomery County, but they still support a lot of young people, a lot of young artists. And so we wanted to recognize, not only Black-owned businesses, but Black serving businesses, and they fell in that category. So, yeah, we're going to have a conversation with them. Millette Green from NBC4 will have an interview with them, and we're excited because they will be honored by the next generation. So, the little token of appreciation that we give them will be given to them by the next person. So we're doing this because people don't know how many businesses in the DMV have survived because of, that we talk about generational wealth. That's what this is. This is people who started institutions and they've continued because the family helped to sustain it and the community helped to support it. And so to me, this is what we're all about here at the Informer. And I think it's something that we need to recognize and honor, in our community as well.
When we talk about women during this Women's History Month, you really, you stand out, and I know you will give me the all shucks about it, but you are and have been a very, very big deal, because even though you do have the legacy of leadership behind you, you have really blazed your own path as with institutional knowledge, but also running an institution. But there just aren't a whole lot of Black women like Denise Rollard Barnes in this country right now. Is this? Do you feel lonely at times when you are continuing to lead the way for a media company?
So, oh shucks, Harold. But I take a lot of pride in sharing the fact that I'd say about a third of the Black-owned newspapers in this country are run by women. So when I have those moments, I'll pick up the phone and call Janice Ware, who's the second generation publisher of the Atlanta Voice, or Sunny Messiah Giles, who's the publisher and actually bought her publication, the Houston Defender. And or my buddy in New York, who's a second generation publisher of the Amsterdam News. We're all over, and when we meet with the National Newspaper Publishers Association, I should have mentioned also Tony Draper, who I think is fourth or fifth generation publisher of the Afro. So there are a bunch of us, and from time to time, we'll just call each other up and ask, how are you handling this? What did you do with this? What was your process? And we have come out of I think, a generation where folks didn't often collaborate and share.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the difference in us, is that we do collaborate and share, and we're all at the point in our lives right now where we're trying to figure out what's next. Um, but yeah, I mean, locally it's lonely. I wish I could
Mm-hmm.
pick up the phone and call Sheila Johnson and say, how did you do blah, 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 and become a multimillionaire. They're people on different levels, right? And so, they may tell you pick up the phone and call, but they may never answer. So at least
Mm.
with these women, we are always there for each other, and I truly, truly appreciate that.
Last week, as part of Black Press Day at Howard University, Dr. Ben Chavis, president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, and I would be remiss if I did not mention, longtime civil rights activist, he delivered the State of the Black Press address. Now, while he said that the Black press is very much thriving and alive, but a lot of work is still needed, what is your opinion of the state of the Black press in 2025, particularly for Black women and others?
Well, I think it's for all of us, even with WHUR, is trying to reach an audience that will support us. I don't know about HUR, but a lot of us now in the Black press, because of this new administration, are being impacted by, the advertising dollars that we really only got a tenth of 1% of already. And so, advertisers are now saying to us, well, because people don't understand, our budgets don't come out of the advertising budgets. Our budgets came out of the DEI budgets, right? And so now that those have been shut down, the advertisers are saying, the companies are saying, well, hold off. We're not sure where this is going. So we can't make any commitments to you right now, but, we'll let you know when we can. So we're being impacted by this. But then we have to think, and then there's, the internet really, I mean, people say, folks don't read newspapers anymore. I'm not sure if that's necessarily true. I haven't seen that totally true. I mean, I know that a lot of people don't, but for those who really are supportive of Black newspapers, they continue to support our papers. Plus, they're free, So we have challenges ahead. But when I think about the fact that 198 years ago, when the first Black newspaper was founded in New York City by a preacher and a journalist, at a time when the majority of Blacks in this country were enslaved, the paper only lasted a couple of years, but it gave birth to a whole bunch of other publications. And so despite what's happening, politically or economically or whatever, we still have stories to tell, and we're going to find a way to do it. So it may be tough. I've been asking over the last 5 years following the murder of George Floyd, I kept saying, is George Floyd really dead? Because, the doors of opportunity open for us. And I thank him to this day. I thank him for giving his life which resulted in the support of so many organizations and institutions, including the Black press. And, as long as you said his name, he was alive. And now we don't say it anymore. And we're coming up on the 5th anniversary. And the doors of DEI and all this whatever are closing. And so, I'm not ready to really have his funeral because I think we can, George Floyd can still live, but we're going to have to find other ways now I really believe, to sustain our publications. And those other ways are in the individuals like the folks that are watching this show or listening to this show. Our survival is in your hands. So, it's always been that way. We just had some good moments and some bad ones.
Let's talk about covering the Black community. It has changed considerably since your father started the newspaper. And how would you, characterize the coverage of the Black community? Is it more difficult? Is it easier? Is it the same, particularly when the paper um, does not really focus on crime and violence so much, although those stories are addressed, but in different ways?
Well, I don't think it's changed. I really don't. I think, journalism is the same, just times change, but our jobs are the same. And the stories, sadly, when I look back at the headlines of 1964, all I had to do is change the date because a lot of the issues that this city was dealing with are still the same. I mean, we're still dealing with these issues. The challenge might be sometimes, which, I don't think it's a big deal always, is that we have people who are in positions, who gain positions of power and influence, who don't always value who we are. So, and I could tell a bunch of stories where I've knocked on folks' doors and they said, "Oh, you're with the Washington Post?" And I'll say the Washington Informer, and they'll say, "Oh, okay. Well, we don't have time right now." Right. And now with, again, the leader of our country who has put the word of distrust, the idea of distrust in the media, it impacts us as well because people don't always know whether they can trust any media. They're not making exceptions to whether you're Black press or Latino press or community press or LGBTQ press or whatever, your press, and they put us all in the same basket. And then access. Again, when we talk about DEI, to me, the real word was the one they added at the end, which was access, right? Because as long as we have access, to government officials or agencies or individuals, we can write the stories. It's just whether, it's being able to, well, it doesn't matter. Sometimes it's like medicine, you don't want to take it, but sometimes it might be the best thing for you. And so we've got to tell the stories, whether people want them or not, or interested. We've gone through this phase, as you and I know, where people were more interested in entertainment news than anything else. And
There's still a lot of that.
Right. And we'll cover that. But it's important for us to really talk about the issues that will make what we're doing as a community to make our communities a better place to live.
Mm-hmm.
And
how do you instruct your editors, your reporters, to steer away from, I guess, the salacious or the negative news, even when that may be at the very crux of a particular story in the Black community?
Give me an example.
If there is a politician, an elected official who has been accused of a crime, and you have, and I'm sure for example, there's always going to be a segment of the Black community who that says, the white man is coming after us, and sometimes Black elected officials or other high standing Black people in the community, they come to the Black media when they're in trouble, but never any other time. So how do you balance negative news with the issues? Is there a nexus?
Well, I mean, first of all, we can't avoid the story.
Mm-hmm.
We've got it. I mean, we've been through this a few times in this city.
Yeah.
And even with our mayor for life, Marion Barry, right? I mean, who had some wonderful stories that we wrote about how he, led the city through, a lot of things that positively impacted residents. And then he ended up in that situation, right, which really hurt my father to the core, to be honest with you. And then he went to jail and came back and ran for office against my stepmother, in Ward 8 and won. And but we understood what certain segments of the community felt about that whole situation and how we had to give voice to that. And that's all. We're reporting. We're not, we don't often endorse candidates, so that wasn't the issue, but we're reporting. And so those voices that said, even in our most recent situation with our Ward 8 council member, there are people who really support him.
Mm-hmm.
And there are others, that are very critical of the situation he is in or has gotten himself into. And so we report the facts, and we want to give all sides a voice. Now, they don't always like talking to us because, if you don't tell the story the way they want you to tell it, then there's a challenge, right? That's a problem. But I think we have journalists on our team who really are trying to follow the rules, the ethics rules of journalism to the fullest extent. And if individuals don't talk to us, well, what do we say? We reached out and they did not respond, or they refused to talk. That's all we can say, and that's a fact. That's not an opinion, So, we have, I think for me, sometimes it's more difficult for our writers to see stories that are right in front of their faces that, they should cover, as opposed to following what all the rest of the folks are doing.
Give me an example of that.
As you all know, I guess, and that's one of the stories we're trying to follow up on right now. And it is sort of local, but it's the impact of the president's decisions as it relates to DEI. So what did they do? They just expelled the South African ambassador.
Yes.
Right? I think he's leaving the country today or tomorrow. And so, folks may look at that and say, wow, that's too bad. But at the same time, this is deeper, right? And you have a large constituency across this country that, is Black folks and others who are interested in how these decisions are going to impact the continent, the African continent, and our relations with Africa. I was just with Mel Foote a few minutes ago with the Constituency for Africa. This is not a story that needs to be swept under the rug. This is a story we really need to follow. And we did one not too long ago when the war in Ukraine first started. And they were talking about all of the folks who were, trying to get out of the country. Fortunately, we had a writer who could write about the Black students who were in Ukraine who couldn't get out because they weren't a priority. There are things, sometimes you have to pull the curtain back a little bit to figure out that this is the story that quote unquote mainstream media may be telling, but it impacts all of us. How can we find the angle to that story that's ours? I remember a long time ago, it was really funny. I don't know if you remember when someone threw a shoe or something at President Bush at a press conference.
I remember that.
And who was that person that dove across the table to protect him? It was a black Secret Service agent.
Oh, wow.
Who was that man? Who was he? We never heard from him again. It's almost like Frank Wills, who
Watergate.
Watergate.
Yeah, the guy who discovered the burglars.
Exactly. You
Yes,
know, we always
I'm a
start making up
Watergate
history,
student. Yeah.
you know, but those are our stories. Those are they may, in some cases, they may be villains. In other cases, in most cases, they're heroes. But who tells their story? And so there's a lot that happens within our communities or that we see in the news, other news. And I always say, it's right in front of your face, but look deeper, put on your, your whatever kind of lenses and see where you can see our story in that story. And just like, I mean, some folks are trying to figure out these Black MAGA people. Who are they? Who are they? And should we shut them out? Not necessarily. I don't know how much of a voice we want to give them, but we certainly do want to understand, who they are.
Yeah. And some of them are probably looking for jobs because they've been
No question.
fired.
No question. Students trying to get children trying to, get those student loans.
Worried about Medicaid.
Worried about Medicaid, trying to figure out if they're going to get their rent paid and still paying high prices for the cost of eggs. But they love that man.
Yeah, indeed. So, speaking of love, obviously, you learn to love the paper and this business. Had you ever wanted to just walk away from it? You talked about some of the challenges that your father left when you took over. How do you deal with the dark days, the difficult days?
Well, again, that's another thing that I think a lot of us face who are business owners, particularly if we married, have kids. It's a lot of stuff that you're trying to deal with while you're trying to sustain or maintain your business. And so, yeah, I mean, there's this WHUT did a wonderful profile on us not long ago, and they talked about the time when I was really seriously considering selling the paper to Don King, the promoter, because Mr. King was looking to buy some Black newspapers. He bought the Cleveland Call-and-Post in Cleveland, Ohio. And someone had mentioned that I was, I needed help and I was ready to let it go. And so we met several times. I mean, Harold, I didn't even have 10 cents in the bank. My banker was a man named Mr. Yu, who owned a liquor store down the street from our office, who would allow my staff to cash their checks and just, tell me, when you get the money, Denise, just pay me back. And so, I talked to Don King, Mr. King, a couple of times. And when he said to me, yeah, I want to do it, but, the first thing I'm going to have to do is change the name. And you could hear like, I slammed on the brakes. I was like, what? And so I said, I was like, I felt I was at the bottom of a well. And he did loan me one day some money to pay our printer because I couldn't pay the printer. I mean, he took this money out of his pocket and gave it to me so I could take it up to our printer. And but after that, I said, no, I'm gonna do everything that I can to get out of this well that I'm in. And when and if I decide to sell it, I'm going to sell it for what it's worth. I'm not giving it away. And so ever since then, I've, with the folks that I've worked with, and that's what's really important, having a great team that sees the vision. I haven't been in that place, since then. I'm getting close because, I just celebrated a big birthday in December and, at some point,
share?
70.
You mean you celebrated the Black Don't Crack birthday?
Yes. And, God, they say God gives you what, 70. So I'm at that point, and I feel very blessed that I feel good. I'm healthy. I'm all that other stuff. But I'm thinking, okay, how long am I going to want to do this? So I don't know what the next generation, if there's a next generation. I'm working on it. I have two sons, one
Mhm.
who publishes The Bridge, which is our monthly publication, and another one that works with us as well. But they both have their dreams and aspirations, which don't necessarily fit with this job. Young folks tell you today, I love what you're doing, but I don't want to work as hard as you do.
Yeah.
So, so.
In these last 2 minutes or so, what do you want your legacy to be?
That's a good question.
That's
That
what we
I
do.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I love what I do because I love the opportunity to tell stories about our community, to help, to tell stories about our community, but not to, we're talking about people who, is contributing to the history um, of Black Washington, or Washington in general. So, as I always say, 100 years from now, when people want to know what's happening, what did people do in DC? How did they live? What were some of the issues? I know that they're going to have to come to the Washington Informer to get those stories. And, I wish we could tell more. I wish we had the resources to do more. I'm hoping to collaborate with, like you and others in the media industry to see how we can get more of these stories told. But to be able to document the lives of Washingtonians, and that includes Maryland and Virginia, but the lives of our people, so that there is a story left to tell to the next generation. I just want people to say, Denise really did the best she could to make sure that our stories were told.
Well, I would say, in addition to Denise doing the best that she could, Denise is the best
Oh, thank
at,
you. Oh, Harold.
at this thing that you've been doing. Like I said, my relationship with your dad, I was a board operator when he had his show on WICB,
That's right.
and he was a prickly person like my father, as you know, but I always respected him, and really, even at that very young age, way back in 1986, I realized that I was in the company of greatness, and I can see that he and your mom and your stepmom also helped you know sire greatness with you.
Thank
So,
you. Thank you. And it dawned on me the other day that my father-in-law and your father were friends.
who's your father-in-law?
Lafayette Barnes.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, indeed.
News
Yeah.
Memorial United Methodist Church.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
But that's a whole hour. Gosh, Denise Rolock Barnes, again, congratulations on this gala coming up. 60 plus years of the Washington Informer. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Harold, and good luck to you too.
Thank you.
All
That
right.
is the Daily Drum for this Wednesday, March 19th. I'm Harold Fisher.